Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast brings you stories and wisdom about life and law enforcement, giving support and encouragement to those who wear the badge. One of our Hey Chaplain listeners is a pastor in a nearby town just down the road from me who was invited to become involved as a chaplain in his local police department. His name is Jeremiah Holcomb, and he contacted me when he was setting up his very first ride-along, and I asked him if he could tell me about it afterward. Today, Jeremiah tells us how he was able to apply his experience in ministering to people to this new experience of being in the front seat of a police car. Ride-alongs are really about building the relationship between the chaplain and the officers of the department and are a crucial way for chaplains to genuinely experience their world. It helps us understand cops and the work that they do in our communities, and it helps build rapport and trust. Here's Jeremiah Holcomb. Welcome, Jeremiah. How are you today?
I'm really well, Jared. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Sure appreciate all you do for the Blue and even encouraging young guys like me jumping in this with you.
Well, I'm pretty excited to chat with you. You are in the early stages of being a chaplain. Can you tell me, how did you get into chaplaincy?
Yeah, so I mean, in my last ministry, my most previous ministry, I did a volunteer rotation as a chaplain at a hospital. Mm-hmm. And so about every pastor in that small community took a turn. And so, but it was a pretty limited thing.
Sure.
And so that included some emergency room calls and things. But again, it was very limited, and it wasn't, didn't feel as specialized as being a chaplain for a police department. And,
I presume you probably had interactions with patients and patients' families. Did you get very much in the hospital setting, very much with the doctors or nurses?
I really didn't. It was
that happens.
And I don't think it was set up that way. They
Right.
really wanted us to make a round to introduce ourselves to the patients at the hospital, and so I mean that was kind of the interaction level. Mm-hmm. And then when we had the emergency on calls, I was fortunate. My first ministry was in the same county as my third ministry, my most previous one, and so I knew the sheriff, of the department there, and so. You know, I think of a couple of automobile accidents that had fatalities and other things. So there was some relationship there, but it was prior to chaplaincy, even just working in the community. So
you were telling me you had done a funeral or something you were approached about.
Yeah, so when we speak of Eudora in specific, so I've been asked recently to be the chaplain of the Eudora Police Department. And the reason for that ask is I did a couple funerals for one of the SROs in our community, and how I handled that family. He went to the chief when they have had a recent opening here for the chaplaincy.
Yeah.
And threw my name in the ring, and the chief approached me at the second funeral that I did for that family.
Yeah.
And it was there that I was invited in. And so that's kind of where it started, was just, serving an officer outside of the realm of chaplaincy, but just being a good shepherd in the community.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I mean, really, it's to give people some context. Eudora is a relatively small town. I mean, how many people are in Eudora now?
It's certainly a bedroom community. It's one that's grown a lot and is continuing to grow. It's doubled in the last 30 years with more growth. So right now it's just under 7,000.
Okay.
And very northeastern Douglas County. And so there's only 4 towns in Douglas County, but
so kind of nestled in between Lawrence, Kansas, and the Kansas City metro.
Absolutely. We're about 20 miles ish west of Kansas City proper, if you will.
Fantastic. So the police department there, relatively small department, probably less than 20 officers, probably.
For sure.
Okay.
Yep, very much less than 20. And when I did my ride-along last week, the sergeant was pleased. In his 6.5 years there, they've grown by 2 officers. So that's been a big deal. Like for him, I mean, that was a meaningful thing, but still not a big department from certainly what you would be experiencing here in the Kansas City, Kansas area.
Well, I came from a really small town. I'm sure we didn't have 2 or 3 officers. You're in a neat experience there. You're in a neat situation where you have a small town, small group of officers. You can get to know everybody in the department, top to bottom, including support staff and everybody else. It's a neat opportunity for you.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to be asked. It's always fun to be wanted and something like that.
Yes.
So you feel less like an intruder, so to speak. And I feel invited in, and so far been highly received by everybody that I've met and worked with to that end.
Fantastic. So tell me about your first ride along.
Yeah. So I was told that I can do ride-alongs and to just let the chief know. And so I let him know. I asked him if he had any goals of number of ride-alongs a month. He said no. And I said, well, I'm going to put a goal out there of one a month. And he says, okay, if that's what you want. So he just says, let me know when. And I could literally let him know exact minutes, I guess.
Yeah.
Of course, if we're in a call, then, and so I went a half hour longer than what I'd originally told him on my ride along last week. But I just sent the chief a text and said, I'm thinking next Thursday at this time. But my time is flexible. I don't know when shift changes are or that. And he says, no, you tell me the time. And so I said, all right, we'll settle in on this time. And he says, I'll have an officer ready. And that was it, right? So it was earlier that day. I was like, can I at least get the name of the officer that I'm riding with? And he goes, yeah, you're looking for this officer. He'll be there. And so that great experience. And again, totally receptive. And I even asked the sergeant that I rode with last Thursday if they'd had a lot of ride-alongs with previous chaplains, and they hadn't. So I think this is new for the officers too, and for me. So I'm not going to I'm not going to do a lot, but again, goal of one a month to, especially to get to know the staff and let them know that I'm a servant in the community they can trust and use.
Was it the first time in the front seat of a patrol car?
Yeah. But, I think there was one time as a kid, and I might have been in the back seat. We had locked our keys out of inside our car, and it was a cold night. I can't remember if it was a parade or something that my family was at, and so the officer was kind enough to take my family, and I think my dad rode in the front seat, and I sat in the back seat then. So that was my only other time in a police car. So this is.
Well, I bet there's plenty of chaplains who've been in the back seat of a police car.
Yeah,
but riding shotgun, and so it's a new experience there. What were your first impressions?
Yeah, first impressions were, again, thankful for the receptivity. And, the officer was very professional, very proper to work with. He was very open to ask me to ask questions, and I didn't have to ask all the questions because he was very informative and just wanting to show me the town and their limits and what they do, even the funny small things as far as what on and off ramps they patrol and don't patrol.
Oh, sure.
Just the little nuances because of where they are as a city versus the county and all those things. So it was neat. It was cool to see his passion for the community. Yeah. And
and to look at the town through his eyes.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting point of view too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, all of those things. Very good. And I had sent you a message prior to that because I know of your work. I knew of your podcast here and listened to a few episodes and knew that I could get some stuff and was very appreciative of that too because and I had reached out to a professor at Manhattan Christian College. I can't remember where you went to school, Jared, but
I went to Ozark.
Yeah. Greg Delort started a program at Manhattan Christian College that in the undergraduate level gets chaplaincy certification. Oh. And so it's the only one nationwide that we know of. And so
that's good.
I went to him as a resource, and he shared a book with me that I should get. But again, this was basically like a chaplaincy Bible book.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, I got way more information than I needed. Was certainly appreciative, but I've got a resource that I will keep on my shelf and refer to quite a bit, I'm sure. But more than anything, my 20 years of ministry experience and my passion to serve, I think, makes it a viable opportunity that I can be a good resource to our community. Your encouragement, man, one of the first things I told the officer is you're in charge, right? I mean, if you ask me to go, I'll go. You want me to stay, I'll stay. Yeah. And was able to speak into, hey, if there is a domestic, if there is a stop at a house where you need to go to the house, and we didn't have any of those, but I would be happy to go and stand at the corner and be a set of eyes for you, a couple sides of the building. Yeah. Those little things, again, you speak your support. And so, again, if things you might say to a young aspiring chaplain. These would be just words of encouragement that could help them. And, for those, if you're aspiring, man, reach out to Jared. He could just probably copy and paste his thread that he sent to me. But,
you made the mistake of asking, hey, do you have any tips for how to do a ride-along? And I send you probably a dozen messages in a row.
I think I got a small book response. So Jared, he's got his book. It's just in Facebook Messenger format right now, but he's got a good book start on this.
Yeah, there's a lot of different people who do ride-alongs with police departments. People in the media, politicians, people who are interested in law enforcement as a career, and they're going to do a ride-along, just kind of see what it's like, get a taste for it. There's all kinds of different people who might ride in that seat with an officer. And some of them are just there to experience the thrill of law enforcement. They're hoping that there's some exciting thing that happens. And I've had several officers who've apologized for having a boring shift. Sorry, it's a bunch of routine, mundane work, and they apologize there wasn't something exciting. I don't know if they were hoping to get me a shooting or or a car chase or whatever, which probably wouldn't be allowed to participate in anyway. But there's people who just want the thrill. There's people who want to learn about law enforcement. And I would hope maybe the politicians and the media are falling into that category where they're wanting to be educated about what is it like for an officer to patrol.
Absolutely.
But beyond that, then, because chaplains have to do that too. We have to learn. There's all kinds of things we just don't know about policies and procedures and methods and that kind of thing. But beyond that, then you also have the need to provide support for the law enforcement mission. And having a chaplain on scene, I think, is very helpful in a lot of ways, where we can provide an extra set of eyes. We definitely approach citizens and victims of crime from a different point of view. We have different responsibilities, and officers, trying to secure the scene and do all that kind of thing. And we can interact in a different kind of way. And I hope a very helpful way. But your ride along, you were certainly learning. You're in the learning mode, right? Tell me about that. Did you have any questions you got surprise answers to or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't know that I got any surprise answers. And it was I guess in your terminology would be mostly a boring a shift as far as, mostly patrol stops. And, there was one person that was called on for having a bonfire in the city limits. And it was, there was a burn ban and it was about to rain. And it was this funny thing. And I certainly wouldn't have called it a bonfire, but there was smoke. So it was a boring shift as far as that goes. But mostly the opportunity to know how the department operates, right? How many officers are on duty at a time, and just that nature. But also get to look into the lens of this particular officer who is a sergeant. So for him, and just getting to think about and see his family life. His wife called during our time together and had to bring him dinner and just different things like that you at least get to look in the lens of, but there's certainly challenges. And so how can I serve that officer and the department in general?
Now that you've done a ride along, what will you do different next time? What's your first plan of action, or what's the first thing you want to get done or ask or do?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to, when I do the next one, I want to make sure it's with a new officer too, right? I think that's priority for me. But some of the questions are going to be the same for those officers too, right? It's I want to know that officer's lens and view, and different roles on the department. Like I was really pleased with when I asked the officer, "What's your favorite thing about the?" It kind of goes into the last question you asked, but what's your favorite thing about being a police officer in the Eudora PD? And he'd been there for quite some time. I want to say 7 or 8 years, and where he grew to the sergeant role that he had. And one of his roles and the neat things is his desire and ability to train new officers. And so, for me, that rings a bell, right? I mean, I like people that are going to pass the torch and leave the legacy of their print on their vocation, and that can see the legacy of what it is to bring others along. And so I think that would probably not be the same answer for a new officer, but I will ask that question again, just being a curious learner, which is something that you encouraged me. That's just it. I want to learn something new. And so I don't always know the questions that I'm going to ask each officer. I think it'll depend on their experience and what they're in it for.
Well, in your size of department, you're going to have young police officers who come on and they learn the job. And then a percentage of those are going to lateral transfer over to a larger department where there's more opportunity or whatever. Maybe there wasn't an opening when they got hired at your department, but they're waiting to go somewhere else. And so this small department's kind of a stepping stone for them, and in a good way. In a good way. But it gives that sergeant you were talking about an opportunity to train and to influence these guys, these men and women, before they go off to that big department and maybe kind of get lost in the shuffle a little bit. And so it's a neat opportunity for you also to have exposure to them and to build rapport and do good ministry and really support them and start them off on the right foot.
Yeah, I feel that way, right? I mean, it's like any opportunity we have to be God's presence with anybody. And so, my hope is for more receptivity, when they get called on. Like anything, officers can get numb to their work, right? You come up to an automobile accident and you've worked them again and again and again, and you've seen death, and you're numb to it because you don't know them. But someday you roll up to that accident and it's your cousin, or it's your child, or it's your spouse, or it's somebody it's your friend or your buddy, and you work that a little different, and maybe you need a little more debriefing and so I just hope for receptivity to plant that seed. If I can do it well, then it's also going to prepare them for utilizing that resource, even if it's not me.
Sure.
It might be a chaplain under another name in their next department or whatever. But yeah, that's anybody and everything. I want that. I want to create that space where if it's not me, I've at least hopefully seasoned the steak, so to speak, so when it's time to eat, it tastes better. Yeah.
I'm always disappointed when I run into a police officer who says, I don't even think my last department had a chaplain, which they might not have.
Right.
But it's also possible they had a chaplain. They just never got to know them, never met them, never saw them at roll calls or ride-alongs or anything. And I'm glad that you're doing this, because that is setting a tone for officers who go off to other departments. They're going to be like, okay, where's the chaplain?
Sure.
And having chaplains have higher expectations of them is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
And so, absolutely. Any other surprises, maybe something, car, equipment, or procedure that you thought it would go a certain way and you were surprised that, oh no, not in this type of department or not under this particular set of policies and procedures?
I think the biggest chuckle to myself was we got to ride in the nicest car that the department has. And so I don't know if that was because of the ride along or because of the rank of the officer I was with. But I found it fascinating that all of the other patrol cars have computers in them.
Okay.
And so this one didn't. So we had to call dispatch for all of our pullovers because he couldn't input the information himself.
Oh.
So we needed dispatch to input everything for us. So that was fun to even see that procedure. I mean, fun. I don't know if that's the right word, but
well, it's interesting.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah. What do you do when you have a certain set of equipment or you don't have a certain set of equipment? And, how do the officers adjust on the fly and change when they move from one car to the other? And yeah, that I find that fascinating.
Yeah. It's neat. But you also think of the layers that are responsible and that are on. I was really pleased with the dispatchers and very aware, very clear, very sharp, very consistent with every call. We did several patrol stops and wrote 0 tickets. And I don't know, inflation or just an opportunity to inform the public is what the officer, the language that he used.
But showed some grace.
That's right. But and I teased him by the end of the night. I said, is this because you had the chaplain with you, right? These guys are lucky that the chaplain's with you tonight. So he was fun to tease with even, and we had a good experience.
Fantastic. All right. So if you are encouraging other chaplains who maybe haven't done a ride-along in a really long time or just not recently because of COVID or other reasons, what is your best elevator pitch for, why should a chaplain do a ride-along?
Right. Well, I hope that everybody that accepts this responsibility as a volunteer has the value of shepherding their community. And part of that is shepherding your servants.
Yeah.
And these are men and women that have sworn to protect and serve. And man, they get a lot of underappreciation. They get a lot of critical verbal abuse from our culture and a lot of our communities in specific, because the policemen and women are called not because people are having their best day, but because they're probably having one of their worst days and worst moments. And so in their worst moments, their life is being uncovered, and these are the men and women holding them to account. And so for us to get to go in and serve them, I think that just resharpen that. Don't lose your why. For me, that is my purpose. I want to serve my community. I want to serve these men and women. And I want to be a resource to them, because they're going to carry that home. And if that affects their marriage and I can speak into that, I want to. Yeah. If that's going to affect the way they interact with people, I was surprised at the officer I rode with how, he communicated a disdain for wanting to go to certain places in a neighboring community that are very much public spaces. Because of the burnout of people. Yeah. And, so I was appreciative of the openness of how this has hardened them, I guess, as an individual. And so to hopefully be able to affirm that and to minister to them and to recognize that, this is dealing with people's the best and worst part of life. And so, again, never lose your why.
Yeah.
When I was told by the chief that this was an opportunity, to me, it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly going to take advantage of that. I'm not going to, like I said, overdo it. My goal is one ride along a month as I get to know the officers in our small department. And it was a 2.5-hour ride along, so it wasn't a huge investment of my life, so to speak.
But you intend to keep coming back.
Yes. Yeah. And for that officer, I will see him again in our community. And now I know him by name. I didn't, I recognized his face before, but now there's a connection. So that excites me, and I'm encouraged.
Yeah. And I would also give a word, maybe especially in smaller communities, that a lot of times in ministry, you could be really lonely, and there's not a lot of people who understand the dynamics of being a pastor in a church and serving people, even people who sometimes don't want your help and aren't willing to follow your advice. The kind of frustration.
Right.
The Venn diagram between church minister and a police officer overlaps significantly.
Indeed.
Everybody starts acting awkward and like they're guilty when you're around. People don't want the pastor or the cop showing up to their party. There's just a lot of things like that we share in common. Even though it is different work, it does overlap some. And so there could be an opportunity to come and invest in police officers that would actually feed the heart of a church minister. I think it would make a real difference. And I really wish that if I had my career to do over again, I would have gotten involved in chaplaincy much earlier.
For sure.
Because I have learned to dearly love police officers.
Yeah.
And I really feel like I connect well, and they connect well with me. What they say and the kind of things that frustrate them and the kind of things they deal with in trying to help people who sometimes can't be helped, man, that speaks to me. Yeah. It really connects. And so I hope chaplains and potential chaplains hear that.
Yeah. And I guess I'll just add to that to say, if you're out there kicking the tires of it, a ride along is a sweet way to get that front row seat. Puns totally intended, but I appreciate your words there. Yeah, there's not too many people like us, yet I feel like in many ways my job's a lot more flexible than theirs, though. Because I am thankful that I'm on call 24/7, but I can have an afternoon to go to my kids' soccer practice or make sure that I just schedule my work. And
generally, people shoot at us a lot less.
Yeah. Of course, I carry a lot less than the officer too. So if I start getting shot at a lot, maybe I'll get my.
We'll find you a bulletproof vest.
That's right. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Jeremiah. I appreciate you coming to talk to me about this. I really look forward to how this progresses for you and the experiences you'll gain, and maybe some of the training that you might be able to get into. And so I'm eager to have you back, and we'll talk more about this journey.
Absolutely. And Jared, I think that as you have more experience and when you're knowledgeable of when that training and stuff is, to loop in guys at small departments and small communities like myself, I'd be happy to get any of those nuggets. But no, and I guess with that, thank you for your passion that you put behind this, because you really show with your heart you care about the Blue and fellow servants, and just appreciate your heart.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming in today.
Absolutely.
When I do ride-alongs with an officer, we spend 8 hours together responding to various kinds of crises, or maybe being bored out of our minds together for a few hours. But either way, we now have a shared experience. I often feel a bond to that officer that might last for a really long time, and it's a deeper kind of familiarity than just hanging out, because we shared the same stress and the same risks, even if it was just for a short time. Chaplains, don't miss this opportunity to connect with your officers by doing ride-alongs. Jeremiah mentioned my list of tips that I sent him, which I'll include in the show notes, and I desperately wanted to edit them more and add to them, but I'll leave them mostly as is, just as kind of a quick guide to ride-alongs for chaplains. If I could add one more note, though, it would be to have the right attitude. As a chaplain, you are not a law enforcement officer. It's not your job to catch bad guys, solve crimes, or otherwise get in the way. You're there as a support. So be curious, be humble, and be understanding. You'll have plenty of opportunity to show God's compassion to both the officer and the citizens you encounter. I know a lot of you have been listening to this show for a long time now, and I would ask that if you would, just take a few seconds, go to Apple, Spotify, Podchaser, or Good Pods, and leave a 5-star review and a few kind words. It'll help the algorithms put this podcast in front of more cops and their loved ones. And if you liked what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. The views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guests, and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.